Welcome to Restoring British Health, the investigative podcast that pulls apart what's really in our food, our water, and our supply chain. Each episode, we dig into the things the industry would rather you didn't look at. We ask the questions nobody's asking, and we put together calls to action so these issues don't just get talked about, they get resolved. Over 1 billion chickens are slaughtered in the United Kingdom every year. 1 billion. That makes chicken the most consumed meat in this country by a long, long way. The average Brit now eats almost 17 kilos of it every year. That's 6 times more than in 1961. Yet the product sitting on your supermarket shelf today bears almost no resemblance, genetically, nutritionally, structurally, or ethically, to the chicken your grandparents ate. What you're buying is not, in any meaningful sense, chicken. It is an industrially manufactured protein product, engineered for maximum yield at minimum cost, adulterated with water, pumped with additives, contaminated with bacteria, and produced from an animal so grotesquely deformed by genetic selection that it can barely stand up. This is not my opinion. Every single claim in this piece is sourced from peer-reviewed research, government data, and official Food Standards Agency reports. And every claim should make you furious. Let's start with the bird itself. The modern broiler chicken reaches its slaughter weight of roughly 2.5 kilograms in just 35 days. That's only 5 weeks. To put that into context, that's an increase of 400% since the 1950s. A study published in the journal Poultry Science demonstrated this by raising genetically representative birds from different eras under identical conditions. In 56 days, the modern bird grew to over 4 kilograms. The 1950s breed, less than a single kilo. So how did this happen? There are 3 companies that control virtually the entire global supply of broiler genetics: Anwer Jan, Cobb, and Hubbard. In the United Kingdom, Anwer Jan's Ross 308 breed accounts for between 70 and 80% of all meat chickens reared. These birds have been selected for one thing above all else: the fastest possible conversion of feed into breast muscle. It sounds like no big deal, however, the consequences are severe. If we just look at the proportion of breast meat by weight, that has increased by 54% since the 1970s. Meanwhile, the relative weight of the chicken's heart has actually significantly decreased. The bird's cardiovascular system cannot keep up with its own muscle growth. We can then add to this that under the standard UK stocking density, each 2 kilogram bird is allocated floor space less than this A4 sheet of paper. The newer, higher welfare standard, add this postcard to that space. Up to 19 birds can occupy a single square meter, with a single shed holding between 25,000 to 50,000 birds. They then keep the light levels deliberately low so the birds don't move around too much, and increases their appetite for their feed. A comprehensive analysis in the journal Animals was undertaken, and it found that chickens with faster growth rates consistently showed poorer walking ability, increased leg disorders, cardiovascular problems, susceptibility to heat stress, and much higher death rates. A major Danish study found that 36% of conventional Ross 308 broilers showed moderate to severe defects prior to slaughter. These are not chickens. They are biological products that have been engineered beyond the point where their own bodies can even function properly. And that is what we are eating. If genetic manipulation wasn't enough, what happens after slaughter makes the picture considerably worse. The practice of mechanically injecting or vacuum tumbling saltwater solutions into raw chicken meat has been carried out now in the United Kingdom for over 2 decades. It used to be just a few sources, but now it's near impossible for any regular consumer to cook chicken without a small puddle being left over afterwards. The process in question uses multiple needle injectors, or much more commonly now, industrial vacuum tumblers, to force sodium solutions, binding agents, and chemical additives deep into the muscle tissue. The reason is dead simple. Water is cheap, meat is expensive. And like a drug dealer cutting their product, you're paying meat prices for that added water. A Food Standards Agency investigation found that some products, which were labeled as pure chicken breast fillet, contained up to 20% added water. In one case, a product even sold and labeled as containing 80% meat was found to only contain 54% actual meat. Another FSA study in 2003 found that 15 out of 25 chicken samples tested claimed to have between 5 and 25% more meat than was actually present. This is daylight robbery. But the scandal actually deepens. So they can get the added water to not seep out of the chicken breast readily, these producers are using proteins in the water to help bind it so tightly that you won't notice. Sounds pretty bad already. However, Food Standard Agency investigators discovered that injection powders marketed as containing only chicken protein actually contained hydrolyzed beef and pork proteins. You heard me right. Chicken that was being sold as halal in cafes and restaurants across Britain were unknowingly contaminated with pork and beef derivatives. A direct violation of Islamic and Hindu and Jewish dietary laws. European Commission inspectors visiting UK processing plants later found even frozen meat cuts that had been thawed, injected with water, and then refrozen in direct contravention of EU regulations, which prohibit the refreezing of meat. These adulterated products were then sold in major supermarkets, including Aldi, Asda, and Iceland. The Trading Standards Institute called this little more than old-fashioned food adulteration, and warned that consumers could expect more and more adulterated products with less and less meat unless something was done. If you buy chicken, you should be getting chicken, right? Well, that warning was issued over 20 years ago. Nothing meaningful has been done. So what does extensive genetic selection for extreme growth do? It doesn't just cripple the living birds, it has fundamentally altered the structure of the meat itself. White striping, a muscle disease characterized by white striations running parallel through the muscle fibers of the breast meat, occurs when the bird's body cannot pump enough oxygen to its rapidly expanding muscles. This causes inflammation, muscle fiber degeneration, and the replacement of functional muscle tissue with fat and collagen, forming scar-like white bands through the flesh. Another typical disease commonly found is woody breast, a related condition which the breast muscle develops a hard, rubbery consistency due to muscle fiber necrosis and abnormal collagen deposition on top, almost identical to muscular dystrophy in humans. Research published in Poultry Science documents that both conditions are directly associated with increased growth rates. The incidence of woody breast rose from 5% in 2012 to 25% by 2015 and has been reported to now affect up to 50% of commercial flocks. A supermarket investigation found visible white striping in 96% of breast meat it sampled that was at the store. 70% showed moderate to severe disease. This is not a cosmetic issue. Affected meat demonstrates reduced water holding capacity, altered protein structure, higher fat content, and increased cooking losses. The meat you are buying is structurally diseased. The industry knows this, so what does it do? It takes the most obviously affected cuts and throws them into processed products, nuggets, chicken strips, and ready meals, where you can never even see the evidence. Campylobacter is the most common bacterial cause of food poisoning in the United Kingdom. The Food Standards Agency estimates in excess of 500,000 cases and 80,000 GP consultations every single year. The number one vehicle for that is chicken. FSA surveys have consistently found Campylobacter present on the majority of fresh chicken sold in the UK. A comprehensive survey from 2017 to 2018 detected it on 56% of chicken skin samples. Among smaller retailers and butchers, that figure was 75%, with 15% of those classified as highly contaminated. The FSA's own target is that fewer than 7% of chickens should carry the highest contamination levels. Think about that for a moment. We are not even debating anymore whether our chicken is contaminated. We are debating how contaminated we are prepared to tolerate. And as many of you know, the chlorinated chicken debate is still rife throughout our food debate for this reason. Now, progress is being made among some major retailers, but the fundamental reality is unchanged. Most chicken sold in Britain carries a pathogen that causes hundreds of thousands of cases of food poisoning every year, and it is completely fixable. The UK poultry industry has, to its credit, reduced the use of medically important antibiotics significantly. An 83% reduction since 2012, according to the British Poultry Council's own figures. However, and this is critical, the Alliance to Save Our Antibiotics has identified a major gap in that narrative. In 2023, 270 tons of ionophores were sold for use in poultry. That is 17 times higher than the use of all medically important antibiotics in poultry combined, and more than the total sales of all other antibiotics across all animal species in the UK. These ionophores are routinely added to chicken feed to prevent coccidiosis, a disease that occurs when birds eat their droppings, which is of course inevitable at current commercial stocking densities. Now here's the loophole. The British Poultry Council classifies these ionophores as antiparasitics, not antibiotics. However, research indicates that ionophore use actually increases antibiotic resistance all the same even in humans, and that ionophore use is increasing year on year on year. The fundamental issue here is architectural. Intensive production at current densities creates conditions in which disease is endemic. The answer should not be routine prophylactic medication. The answer should be conditions that do not require it in the first place. Let me bring this all together for you. The United Kingdom slaughters over 1 billion chickens every year, the overwhelming majority of which are genetically deformed, fast-growing breeds, reared at densities that cause chronic stress and disease, fed routine medications to manage the consequences of those living conditions, slaughtered at 5 weeks old, contaminated with bacteria, adulterated with added God knows what and chemical binding agents, and increasingly afflicted by muscle diseases that change the nutritional composition of the meat itself. And this is the protein source that millions of British families rely upon as a dietary staple. Now, we don't have food purity laws in this country. We have a regulatory framework that permits processors to inject water into raw chicken and sell it alongside genuine meat at a premium, with absolutely nothing on the label to tell you what you're actually buying. While in Finland, not a single antibiotic has been used on any broiler farm since 2010. In the Netherlands, a consumer-led campaign forced retailers to stop selling these fast-growing breeds entirely, with the share of slower-growing breeds rising from 10% to 20% in a single year. We could do this. We choose not to. If over 1 billion chickens per year are reared in conditions that produce structural muscle disease, chronic lameness, cardiovascular failure, and routine bacterial contamination, and this is the primary animal protein consumed by British households, then what is the cumulative effect on the health of the population eating them? What is the nutritional difference between a genuine chicken breast from a bird that lived for 4 to 5 months, moved freely, and developed naturally, and a water-injected white-striped fillet from a 35-day-old bird that can barely walk? Why does the Food Standards Agency set targets for acceptable levels of high Campylobacter contamination rather than demanding its elimination? Why do we have no British food purity legislation equivalent to the standards that exist in Germany, in Scandinavia, or across Europe? And why has no political party in this country ever framed public health as a matter of food integrity rather than NHS funding? The answer to these questions will not come from the food industry, which profits from the current status quo. They will not come from a regulatory framework that has been captured by the corporations it was designed to oversee. They will only come from political will, from a movement prepared to say that the adulteration of our food supply is not just a consumer issue, it's a national health emergency. I believe the time for that movement is now. This is the first piece in a series examining what Britain puts into its food, its water, and its people, and what it's costing us. Please do like and subscribe and share this as far as you can. The time for change is now. Thank you.